So if everybody could quiet down. So how we're going to work this is instead of having people, I really don't like the lineup at the microphone. I hate that. So so we're just going to have people raise your hands. I will pick people to ask a question. Go ahead and project as much as you can so everybody can hear what you have to say, and try to direct it if you can to one particular speaker if you'd like, or it could be to the whole panel. And yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. Start this discussion. Who'd like to ask a question? Yes.
My question's for Margie. You talked about some of the egg producers who have these certifications of being, cage-free or humane or whatnot that clearly aren't. And I'm wondering if there's any effort to take to task the folks who issue these certifications for being sort of falling down on the job.
Well, I know with the one farm that I profiled, the Judy's family farm, the Animal Legal Defense Fund does a lot of work in that regards, and they did sue them in 2012 and just won their lawsuit, and the farm has to pay about $45,000 to the Sonoma Humane Society, ALDF, and another organization. But that is definitely in the realm of legal action. That's not something Animal Place does, so it's something that ALDF or other animal rights lawyers would have to tackle. Yes, they can be taken to task, but it's often a costly, long legal battle to do so.
But and if I could just add, there are a lot of these lawsuits happening, though. COK has a few. I know there's other organizations that, and they're mostly around what's it called, false advertising. False advertising lawsuits. But they're calling them on it. And with the Judy's eggs one, they actually had to change their packaging because on the package it had this sweet little, it was two kids sitting in grass and then a chicken and a little chicks. And they had to take the chicken and chicks off the carton because they were sitting in the grass, and that's not even what their life is like. So they had to change all kinds of wording, things that they had said, humane language that they used. So I think these lawsuits are really a good thing, and there's more and more of them happening. Yeah.
My question is to Ethan. It's Whole Foods, concerning Whole Foods. Everybody loves Whole Foods. But the last animal rights conference I was.
Could you speak up? Because nobody can hear you.
I'll repeat the question. Go ahead and. Yeah. Okay. Let's do that.
It's about Whole Foods. Everybody loves them, of course, and they do great work. But it's the humane myth that's got me concerned. After the last animal rights conference, I take the humane leaflets from Tribe of Heart, and I'm placing them on the chickens and the eggs and I feel guilty about doing that, but I've stopped shopping there. So it's a real. I've been an animal rights person for 40 years, but I'm like this now. It's like, should I do it? Should I not do it? Should I, support them or not? How do you get around that?
So it's a great question, and I think it's just that coming up with ways to live in the world that we live in. And I am very interested in working with McDonald's, for example, and Burger King and Taco Bell and everything. And I have to look at this pragmatically, and if I could get 5% of Big Mac in terms of the rest of it were animal protein, I would take it in a heartbeat. Not eat it myself, but because it's a numbers game, you just want to try to get the most number of people to eat plant protein and reduce the suffering for the most number of animals. And so, I don't like that Whole Foods does that, and I don't like the humane. I don't like Chipotle's campaign. I don't like Whole Foods campaign. I think it's window dressing. But it is the world we live in, and you have to deal with the people that are in the world you live in.
Thank you. I really appreciate it because that really clarifies it for me. I really know what to do.
All right. Another question. Way up there. Can you project?
Yes, I can.
Awesome.
So, in the poultry meat industry, is it correct that there are no poultry meat industries that sex the chicks? They are both males and females the percentages of where those dead baby male chicks from the egg industry go?
Well, first of all, unlike the egg industry, in the chicken meat industry, like the turkey industry and the duck industry, both male and female birds are raised and slaughtered specifically for their flesh. Many millions are thrown away, the same as in the egg industry, because they don't hatch quickly enough. They're just still coming out of their shells, and everything is regulated by automation. If they're crippled or whatever. So many get thrown away, both males and females, in both the egg industry and the chicken, turkey, meat industries. But just to clarify, both males and female birds are in the meat industry are raised and slaughtered specifically for meat. I believe you asked a question about the how much or what percentage of hatchery birds who are destroyed at the hatchery would go into what? The bulk goes to pet food and back into livestock and poultry feed. See, one of the reasons that the livestock and poultry industry love the pet industry is because the pet industry is a dumping ground for tens of millions of dead animals, animals who die long before they get to the slaughterhouse. And all, they can feed manure back to animals raised for food. And what they have quickly, they have 3 grades of food. For human beings, then the grade below that is for pet food, but it's terrible stuff. It has to be all doctored up to be edible by pets, by dogs and cats. And then the lowest grade of feed grade is for livestock and poultry. It's the garbage of the garbage. But keep in mind, too, that things like chicken sausages, hot dogs, all that kind of stuff, that is all garbage. I mean, real garbage, that it has to be colored and have food, all kinds of additives to make it flavorful. And when they feed all this garbage to chickens, for example, being raised for human consumption, they have to put all kinds of additives even into that to make it edible for these birds and pigs and so on to be able to eat. But the majority of the hatchery, what they call hatchery debris, all these baby birds who are not going to go directly into the human food supply chain are going to go into the pet food and the livestock and dairy. So indirectly, you're going to eat, if you're eating animal products, you're going to eat these hatchery birds in the form of the flesh, eggs, or milk that they were turned into as feed for the livestock and poultry industry.
Well, we don't eat them directly at all, and they don't go into fertilizers.
Oh, they go into fertilizer too, yeah.
But we do not eat them directly. The babies.
Not as far as I know.
Okay, another question.
This is for either Colleen or any other of you. If you have cats, what can cats live on a vegan diet? Do you want to take it?
Do you have a cat?
Sounds like other people want to answer that question. God, it's probably next to where to get your protein. This is probably the most common question I get because my cats are plastered all over my Facebook page. So this is my opinion, and I am not convinced that it is safe or healthy for cats to eat vegan, 100%. They're obligate carnivores, and they do have requirements for specific amino acids that, yes, vegan cat food does supplement with, but I'm not convinced that it's the right thing for them. Obviously, I advocate vegan dog food. Be dog in the house. And it's true. I mean, it's not even just because they are built as omnivores and they thrive on a vegan diet. So it's safe for them, it's healthy for them, and they thrive on it. But cats do not. And I know there are anecdotal stories of cats who do, but I'm not convinced that that's the right thing for all cats. I actually did it a long time ago for one of my cats, and they're in my care, and I'm going to do the best thing for them. It's one of those things. What Ethan was saying. It's not a perfect world, and I'm not trying to be perfect. I'm trying to do the best I can. And right now, while I'm taking care of cats, I'm going to do the best thing for them. Now, you can give them some, maybe 10%, because my cats actually like plants. I mean, they try to steal my tortilla chips, and they love, broccoli, that kind of thing. So sure, like they can still eat plants and you can kind of reduce a little bit, but in terms of the commercial food, this means nothing for the animals themselves. I don't feed my cat's land animals. I feed them only aquatic animals. That means absolutely nothing to the aquatic animals who are being killed, but somehow it's, for me, I don't know. They eat aquatic animals only, so it's only the commercial, salmon and tuna, etc. So that's my answer. Because you asked me.
Okay, here we go.
So this question is for Robert. So in your presentation, you talked about how popular culture we're kind of inundated with popular culture and all these misrepresentations of other animals. And I'm wondering, what are some strategies that we could take to combat that? Because these industries have way more ability in terms of funds to kind of get out this message.
Right.
And, even the largest animal rights organizations don't compare. So what are kind of some strategies we can take from the grassroots and from very, very low funding organizations to kind of counter this narrative?
We use the internet a lot. We use a lot of organic search strategies and social media and sharing, and we're trying to build a network of we call them Facebook pollinators. People that are willing to volunteer their time to help share our posts and our information. And it's reaching millions of Facebook users, and we haven't really even scratched the surface, and we haven't spent as an organization, we haven't spent any money, in terms of building a volunteer base and continuing to do that. So there's a tremendous amount of potential online that I think is completely untapped as far as reaching our audience and doing it in a kind of a guerrilla way that doesn't require huge marketing budgets. And because the stories we have and the images and truths that we have are so compelling that they tend to stand out more than some of the other crap that you get from popular culture. So does that help?
Yeah.
Great.
I was reading in this book, Meatonomics, that the federal government has a big pot of subsidies, almost as big or even bigger actually than the oil subsidies, that goes to the animal agriculture industry who gets to use it for advertising and all that stuff. And I was wondering if there's anybody working on that, or making things known.
It's your turn.
Maybe beyond our panel.
You can go right to the government. Okay, that's one option, right? And talk to them about where they're putting their money. They might not listen. You can go to the industries who are getting the money and say maybe you should take it. They probably wouldn't listen. But for me, just because this is where all of my work is spent, is on the individual empowerment and education, is that people don't even know that. I mean, this is really important information, to Robert's point about really spreading this information and spreading it far and wide. Just that little bit of information, I think we can forget when we become advocates what we once didn't know. And we have to always remember what we didn't once know, because we have to remember that everybody around us probably doesn't know. We can't presume they do, and we can't presume they're stupid or uncaring because they don't. So we have to presume they don't know just like we didn't. And so a little graphic, a little infograph, a little post on Facebook or Twitter that says, did you know? Or just, wow, I just found out that, ... That's so powerful, because you don't know who's paying attention. You don't know what they're going to do with that information. You just don't know how that's going to affect them. So that information, even though it sounds small, one person at a time, it's the most, what did we talk about before about those phones? It's so powerful. So share that and let other people, let that germinate beyond what you don't even know what's going to happen with that.
It's a great suggestion. Yeah, awesome.
Yes, this question's for Colleen. How would you give advice to someone, for example, one spouse is vegan, the other is not, and then raising children?
Yeah, see, this is the problem with my answers because I have podcast episodes on every one of these topics. So I usually just refer to myself when I answer these questions. I do have a podcast episode specifically called Vegan Dating, and I talk a lot about that, you know, the number of different scenarios that you have, whether you're vegan and dating and looking to date someone. Should I date vegans? Should I not date? You know, should I date only non-vegans? You want to date only vegans? You're going to really narrow your pool, but go for it. And then what about when I become vegan but I'm already in a relationship? What about when he, you know, so there's a lot of different scenarios and I talk about it. So, I mean, you know, look, I really believe in the power of planting seeds. I love that's the pollination, right? I really believe in the power of that. And a young woman came up to me before we were talking and she said, you know, I'm vegan, my boyfriend is not, but he became vegan for a little bit and then he got pressure from his family and he stopped and now he's eating animals again. And what do I do? And I brought him to Animal Place and I showed him Earthlings, but he doesn't have the same reaction I do. And what do I do? And what do I do? And what do I do? And I said, you need to let go. Because he's reading your anxiety around what you want him to do, and subconsciously, you don't know how it's playing out for him. He might be like, okay, like it's just, but as soon as you relax in your own expectation, it doesn't mean you feed him meat, animals, right? It doesn't mean you don't take him to Animal Place. It doesn't mean you don't, you know, bring him to vegan restaurants. It just means you need to let go of the expectation of what he's supposed to do with that information. And frankly, once you relax, he relaxes, and then he's more open to whatever's going to happen. But you can't even have that be part of your expectation. So just letting go, being a wonderful ambassador for compassion, and that's going to be more attractive than any urgency you have to want them to change, right? And so children, same thing, right? You know, if it tastes good, they will eat it. Bottom line, make them good food, answer the questions, speak to them about, you know, the truth, give them age-appropriate material, and then, you know, there's all the information about the nutrients, et cetera. So, I mean, those are big questions. You know, just be who you are, and people will be inspired by that.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great question. We think about it a lot, for sure. Right now, we're super focused on this creating meat from plants, and you know, we have to be disciplined about that. And you know, there's a lot of excitement around from our scientific guys and everything else about trying different things. But I think until we get that exactly right, that's where we're going to spend our time. Yeah. Right. No, it's so interesting because, you know, I face it with my own kids all the time, you know, and so we're coming out with a product which I can't describe in great detail because we have a press thing we're doing with it, but I talk about it like the Tesla of meat because it is so cool. It's like, so so if you think about, you know, this concept of the stuff I showed up there about, you know, this is better than meat because it lacks this, that, or the other, but how about strengthening that argument, saying it's better than meat because it's got X, Y, and Z, right? And it's a complete, you know, it's got omegas, you know. So anyway, so we're coming out with something that sort of makes that argument. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah.
Yes, another question, Mr. Brown, along these lines. You're promoting Beyond Meat. The philanthropist Bill Gates is promoting Beyond Eggs. Any connection?
So yeah, Josh, I know Josh Tetrick pretty well, and it's actually, so Gates is an investor in our company. I think he's mentioned Beyond Eggs, but the guys from PayPal are the folks that are really behind that. I mean, I'm rooting for them. Like Hampton Creek, yeah, I'm really rooting for them. It's a good product and it's cool. Yeah.
So we all talk about ways to advocate for animals, but one of the things that happens as a view of animal activists is that they're obnoxious. You know, people think that vegans are annoying on Facebook. People think that many of these things have a negative side. So how would you address people's view that we're pushy? You know, besides not being pushy. You know.
No, why don't you start? Maybe I'll.
First of all, I don't think we should ever view ourselves and our work in a negative, self-deprecating way. We have to develop confidence in our cause. We have to keep the animals in mind. We have three things that form a single package. We have the ethics, we have the environment, we have the health, and I would add also the world hunger issue. So we have to develop a sense of confidence in ourselves, in the value of what we have to offer, and we can't allow them to define who we are. That doesn't mean we should be obnoxious and so forth, but you know, throughout history, social justice activists have always been accused of being pushy and too extreme. I mean, that was part of the civil rights movement that I remember when I was in the 60s. I was, you know, part of that civil rights movement. And the idea that people who wanted civil rights right now for African Americans were pushy and extremists. And imagine during the Civil War. And so social justice activists have always been, you know, sort of the idea is to put social justice activists on the defensive so that we're deflecting into defending ourselves or apologizing for what we stand for and losing our focus and our purpose. So we cannot allow those who don't want to hear our message to define us and determine our identity. We have to determine our own identity. And that means we have to believe in our identity and what we stand for. So we can't let them decide, oh, well, I'm being accused of being pushy, so I just better make myself a little smaller and a little more insignificant and a little more, you know, ingratiating. Again, I just think that's, we got to get over this idea as animal activists that we don't want to offend people and so on. I mean, if the person is calling us pushy, well, again, every situation is different, and that's just an easy way to kind of make us feel like, well, they hope we'll just shut up and go away. But we're not going to shut up and go away. So we're here to stay.
Absolutely, I agree. I agree with Karen 100%. And there is a difference between offending someone and someone being offended by what we do. So what we get confused, we confuse that line. So people wind up not speaking up because they're afraid it's going to offend someone. Now, if I set out to offend someone, that's different. And I don't ever set out to offend anybody. I set out to speak the truth, to be a voice for the animals, and to speak my truth, right? Tell my story. If that offends someone, that's not mine. I didn't set out to do it. But if that upsets someone, that's not mine. Now that's what's different, and I think where people get afraid is that they're afraid if they speak up at all that someone's going to be offended. Yeah, they might be. But that's what stirring the pot means, right? I mean, that's what it does, and that's what we're all do. That's what it means to be an advocate. That's what it means to be an activist. So, but I just think it's important to make that distinction. And so I absolutely agree that we have to speak up. I think it's a matter of finding our own voice and doing it in a way that feels right for us. I think it's a matter of being of honoring the platforms too. I don't think there's always an appropriate, like there's not always one way to say the same thing. I think online it's different than if we say it in person than if we write it in an article. Like I think there's just different ways, and I think we can all forget that I don't think there's a lot of productive conversations happening out there in comments or message boards or, you know, I just don't. And people who know my work know that I don't check the comments ever. I mean, not like I'm talking like in an article that's been out there and then all of a sudden it becomes just, you know, a flame war. I just think it's just not productive for vegan. No, like it's not a dialogue anymore. So ultimately what I say is, you know, speak up, speak your truth. Don't be attached to what that truth is going to do to another person. But I also am very mindful of, I'm not looking to be right. I'm looking to be effective. And that's often a question I ask myself at a moment where I'm talking to someone or being online. I'm not looking to win an argument. I'm looking to just be effective and speak the truth. And so those are the kind of things I think it's helpful when we're out there advocating.
Just have one thing.
Of course.
Yeah. Just one quick thing in response to that. Non-vegans and people on the outside of a cause are always looking at activists or people on the other side as being, like Karen said, pushy. But what's interesting is that in the vegan, non-vegan case, non-vegans are often telling vegans how to be better activists and what they should really be doing that's more effective. But isn't that a red herring? because if they really cared about the cause, and if the cause was something that they were engaging us in a discussion either online or in person, wouldn't they be more concerned and interested in the cause than our own personal character and the issue of whether something is considered pushy or not? It often seems to me as just another red herring, and maybe it's better just to kind of find some closure with that type of discussion and move on to something more effective.
Margie, you want to say anything on that?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Hang on to it, might be good.
Okay.
Okay. Lindsay.
So two questions. One probably for Marjorie and Karen relating to the pasture-raised issue. I didn't come till afternoon, so I know Karen didn't go into this too much, but Marjorie did. So you start to see that's a premium that Whole Foods have pasture-raised. And then I questioned them at the farmer's market, and they bring out the pictures, show them that they're following the cows and that they only go into housing at the end of the day. So one thing they don't mention is the longevity. I want to know of the chickens before, how long they're productive, and are these chickens that are older genetic stock that are not in pain all the time like so many of the factory farm chickens just due to inbreeding. So that's part of this whole pasture raised. Some of the downside of it that is hard, you need it as ammunition when talking to people. And then the second one is more for Ethan, and that is the whole amino acid profile thing of meat, and then getting also for the Farm Bill, which is the disaster that happens each year that causes these subsidies. That is a corollary to an earlier question, where basically the meat industry is being propped up with our tax dollars due to these subsidies because of the horrible Farm Bill that comes out each budget session. And are you getting the P lobby maybe to go against it? And how do you do the amino acid profile issue? So those are two separate questions.
Okay, start with start with the first question, and then
I'll just speak to we just did, Animal Place just did a rescue these past 2 weekends, and we saved 1,100 hens from a pasture-based egg farm that was going out of business, so yay to that. And this is a farmer that sells at the San Francisco Farmers Market, touted as one of the most humane farms in existence. It's a really renowned small farm, certainly in the Bay Area and then up further in Northern California. They live in a barn, smaller than this room, 500 of them, for 5 months out of the year because it's cold. So they're debeaked. They don't clean the barns, so there's a foot of shit that you just step in because you're trying to catch the hens. And then even when they have access to the outdoor area, there's no supervision, there's no predator protection. They get picked off by bears and by hawks and by other predators. They don't actually have a lot of greenery to speak of. This is a very mountainous region. And this farm, we pulled birds from before, slaughters at a year. That's when they kill those birds. And these are still the birds that have been selected. They're brown hens to produce brown eggs, but they've been selected to produce, 280 eggs a year. So when we rescued these girls, they had lice, which is super common, external parasites. Several of them have died because they already are suffering the ill effects of ovarian cancer and egg yolk peritonitis and all those infections and problems that come with high production. So they will most likely not live as long as they could. And this is still a farm that is, people were sad to see the farm go out of business because, they sold, their eggs went for $9 a dozen. These are very expensive eggs, organic, pasture-based, super expensive. But that's also because the consumer is paying for the actual cost of those eggs. They're paying for that food. They're paying for that, actual cost. It's trickling down to the consumers, which doesn't happen on industrial farms. You can buy a carton of eggs for $1 a dozen because you're not really paying for what goes into producing those eggs. So the farms we've worked with, for the most part, with a few exceptions, have been those pasture-based small farms. And we see the same health problems and the same mutilations and the same suffering and misery that goes on in large farms. And that's not what consumers see. You know, they see the nice egg carton or the nice pretty pictures on the website, and they don't go to those facilities and smell those barns and see those hens suffering.
Well, as far as birds bred for meat, particularly chickens, it's interesting that virtually all of the chickens that locavores and small farms like the Polyface in Virginia, Joel Salatin's operation, and so many of these backyard chicken keepers who put up websites and slaughter their own birds and brag about it, they're all using the birds who have been bred for intensive meat production. In other words, not to get too much into this, but in the 1940s, there was this, post-World War, there was this huge drive to create a chicken who would grow very fast and very large, and particularly grow a very large amount of breast muscle tissue. So there were contests that took place that the A&P company, the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, sponsored. So what eventually happened was that a type of chicken, broad-breasted, Cornish type of chicken, was crossed successfully from a commercial standpoint with the white Plymouth Rock type of chicken. So you got this very fast grow, and then there's all types of, I mean, the breeding goes on, inbreeding, crossbreeding, every type of breeding. So essentially when people say they're raising their own chickens or slaughtering their own chickens as backyard chickens or on small farms like the Polyface or the many here in California, and the ones that Michael Pollan had, you know, he said they were stupid and they let the foxes eat them up, so they deserve to be punished and all that kind of stuff, you know. These are the white chickens who they come straight from a factory farming world. They have been, those are the chickens that people who think they talk about eating locally and eating and avoiding factory farming. That's the majority of the chickens that they are purchasing from hatcheries.
They're genetically modified.
They're genetically modified birds. They've been genetically modified to grow 65 times faster than a normal chicken, to have a body which is completely distorted so that they'll just be a big pendulous breast the size of a filet mignon, basically. Birds who are become crippled almost immediately because their skeletal system can't support the rapidly accumulating body weight that the skeletal system is supposed to hold up. And just let me tell you this. A chicken's bone structure isn't even more or less completely developed until they're at least 10 weeks old. Okay, what is that? 2.5 months old? Is that right? Is that right? 2, 4. Okay. So the chickens who people are slaughtering, whether it's on in factory farm slaughter plants or in their backyards or whatever, are 6-week-old birds, or sometimes 5.5. Because see, the whole drive of industry is to get these birds to be 6 pounds in like a day. That's what they want to do. They just keep breeding and breeding and breeding them so that they'll just take a shorter period of time to get them to be enormous and slaughtered as quickly as possible. So, so these chickens are being slaughtered at 6 weeks or 5.5 weeks of age. Their skeletal system is like, and their cartilage system can't even begin to hold their bodies up. So again, it doesn't matter as far as these so-called meat-type chickens are concerned. They're all coming from a factory farming, breeding stock. There are a few companies globally that own all the stock, and they distribute these birds into the various other companies like Tyson, Purdue, or whatever company you want to call it. So they're all basically the same basic birds, and they all come from what we sort of, just sort of summarize into terms like factory farming or industrialized farming production. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it's not cost effective for any egg operation to hatch their own chicks. They can't do it. They can't make money and hatch their own chicks. They have to get them from the hatcheries. So they're all coming from the same source.
I just wanted to add one more thing that I hear frequently from locavores. Oh, this is a heritage breed. And they think there must be an island in the tropical jungle that's called Heritageville or something. They don't understand that heritage means that those birds were specifically bred for a purpose, regardless of how long ago it was. So people confuse that the tropical jungle fowl, came with an ancestry, and it's been mucked with ever since then. So when you hear a locavore try to tell you that his birds are natural because they're heritage breed, please correct them.
That's a very good point.
Do you remember their motto?
So let's move on to
the motto of the Heritage USA is "You have to eat them to save them."
Yeah.
So the whole idea is to create a market for these animals to save because they care so much about this particular breed. And to Mary's point, it's a breed. These are breeds still. But I don't think we had to eat the eagles to save them. Thinking the whales.
Good point.
I know you want to. One point too about the word heritage is very interesting because it suggests that animal agriculture is a conservation effort. It is not. It's a business of breeding, raising, and slaughtering animals.
And I want to say one more thing. This is a fascinating topic. I mean, it is. It's so interesting, especially because we don't really talk about the ancestry. And I talk a lot about the ancestry of these animals in my podcast and in my work because we think that these animals just were plopped here for us to do with as we please, and we forget that they had a wild ancestry. All of the animals that we eat as domesticated animals were once wild. I talked about the aurochs in my talk. All of the chickens, all of the goats, they all were wild once. They didn't come here, okay, I wanted this, it's great, eat me. And that's what they would have you think. That's what the folks would have you think. And I talk a lot about the fact that, you touched on it, Karen, is that we kill all of these animals as babies. In every one of these situations, even those who, certainly there's the dairy cows who are kept as breeders and the beef females who are kept as breeders, et cetera. But they're all killed way before their time, way before what their true life expectancy would be. And I think that's really striking for people because I don't think they really make the connection that they are all babies, every one of them.
One of the reasons why all these birds and other animals are slaughtered as babies and one of the reasons why they're confined so that they cannot move, is because people want soft, succulent, undeveloped muscle tissue. Basically, all of the animals people are eating are veal calves. In other words, veal calves are totally confined in those stalls so that they will not develop their muscle tissue. They want them to just be there and not, because for one thing, when you develop muscle tissue, your muscle turns dark. And if people want white flesh, it's got to be flesh that is basically unused, unexercised flesh. And one of the reasons for confinement, and this doesn't start just in the 20th century, this is ancient farming practices. You confine animals you want to slaughter for meat or you want to use. You want the feed that you're giving them to only be turned into the biological trait that you want to have as a result. So you want to confine animals and crowd them so that they will just sit there and not move and not develop their muscles. So they'll just turn their food, or as industry says, their feed, into the muscle tissue or into the milk or into the eggs and not be wasted as activity or turn into muscle, which is going to be stringy and going to be tough. People in our society particularly, they want muscle tissue that is soft and undeveloped. So that's another big reason why you slaughter all these animals as babies. And as Colleen just said, even the so-called breeder animals, they're all slaughtered as, 12-year-old children, basically.
Okay. So there was a second question there, somewhere back there. Did we still remember what it was? Okay.
I can give a very brief answer to it. So on the amino acid profile, we make sure that it's fully consistent with what you'd be getting from animal protein in terms of complete protein, because that is a criticism, and so we make sure we're careful about that. And then I think the second piece was around sort of lobbying, and is the pea industry going to take on the cattle industry, which is good. I think it's actually a really astute point. Like, we do need a plant protein lobbying presence in the U.S. Congress, and there's a lot of reasons why we don't have that. I mean, for example, peas are prominently grown in Europe and that we use anyway, and in Canada. And then soy obviously is pretty conflicted around both a feedstock for livestock as well as for our products. So, but as we develop more and more sources, I think it's very important that we do have the lobbying voice. So, good point.
Okay, question.
Yeah, I had a question. It's about the chickens. So I know how they're crammed all together, in the barn for 5 months of the year because of the weather. So when you actually get the chance to rescue some of them, what do you do with them during those 5 months of the year?
Oh, well, we're in a much more temperate climate. We don't get a lot of snow where we are. Even if we did, we would still allow them access to outdoors so they could engage in all their normal and natural behaviors. We have a heated barn so that they stay warm. They like it. The perches are all individually heated. So we don't have that problem. I'm sure the folks who live where there's actual winters, can answer to what they do there.
Yeah, been a challenge this year. Most of our highs were double-digit below zero. And it's difficult to sleep on nights like that knowing that the city is full of backyards with little boxes with maybe a light bulb, if that. People who have backyard chickens. The optimal, according to the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, the optimal temperature range for chickens is between 55 degrees and 70 degrees. And in Minnesota, that ain't going to happen in a backyard. Our rescues have been, they're sheltered in our basement. We've converted our basement into their living quarters. They sleep down there year-round, and then during the day, the yard has all been divided up into areas that they can be outside. During the winter, we'll usually plexiglass off the areas, some of the areas that have roofs over them, so that it's kept snow-free and there's scratching material and they can go out when it's warm enough. That didn't happen this year. So we have a lot of very unhappy birds that look out the window, and I think this weekend we had to miss it because we were here. Our volunteers said that the birds finally got to go out this weekend because the temperatures were warm enough. But they suffer frostbite, and so I would say probably at least 30% of the rescues that we take in are missing, in some cases, entire limbs, in many cases at least toes and combs and wattles that have been lost to frostbite. So it's the Midwest is not the tropics. It just drives me nuts to think that people will get these animals, stick them out there, and just somehow magically they're going to be fine, and they're not.
We're in Virginia, just real quickly, we're in Virginia, and this winter we've had several snowfalls, unusual, and it's gotten down to the 20s. Just so you know, chickens like snow. They don't like the extreme cold. But 20s, 30 degrees, you open the doors and they'll come out and they'll run all over the snow. So just so you know, chickens are actually very hardy. It's really when it gets to about 20 degrees above zero, 15 to 20 degrees, that they're susceptible to frostbite. But chickens are amazingly resilient also, and they can really survive a lot of different types of temperatures. And just to make you aware that they're not just hothouse flowers. And if they have a chance to go out and run around in the snow and it's not utterly freezing cold, they will take advantage of that, unless there's something wrong with them.
Yes.
I just wanted to find out if anybody has any information about the industry of goats. There's goat cheese, goat milk, and there's also sheep cheese. So does anybody know anything about those animals, how they're treated, where the cheese or the milk comes from?
In California, the dairy goat industry is a quickly growing industry. People see it as that humane alternative to cow farming. You see the same problems. If I've been to a lot of auction yards in California, and you'll go to these auction yards and you'll see these pens full of, they're little day-old baby goats, and these are all the males. That's where they end up. So those babies are still taken away, especially the males. They have no commercial value, the dairy goat breeds. And you have the same problems. The dairy goat breeds have fewer health problems because they're not as heavily bred, inbred or line bred as Holsteins and Jerseys and those cow dairy breeds. But they're all killed, when they're between 7, 8 years old. And it's becoming definitely more of an ethical problem. I don't think there's a big sheep milk industry in the United States. And the goat dairy industry is not very large either in the United States. Globally, goat meat and goat milk is definitely one of the most commonly consumed animal flesh and animal milks.
Yes?
I just want to say to all of you, your compassion and your tender-heartedness really shows, and the fact that you still march into the face of all the things that you see and speak against and educate the world about. We're really grateful for that. You're putting yourself in a really hard place. Thank you.
Again, in the 20th century, chickens were intensively bred for two purposes, either to be what they call a meat-type bird or an egg-type bird. So you take a Mediterranean strain, a small, compact little bird known as the leghorn hen, and you breed her and inbreed her and overbreed her to the point where she lays and goes from 25 eggs a year, 30 eggs a year, to 250 to 280, or even up to 300 eggs a year per hen. So basically, and then see, like in the late 19th century, mid 19th century, late 19th century, into the early 20th century, they bred birds, what they call all-purpose chickens. Chickens who were what they call good egg layers and had a lot of flesh, like the New Hampshires and the Rhode Island Reds and all kinds of, So, I mean, breeding of chickens goes back in China and elsewhere, many, many thousands of years. Breeding is ancient. Breeding of animals for specific traits is an ancient practice. I don't know if that answers your question, but if you want to take it over.
Well, and just, it's really on the same note, and I love that this comes back around to what we were saying before about these animals having a wild ancestry. The aurochs, when we talk about cattle, was the wild ancestor of all the breeds of cattle today. There wasn't, there weren't milk breeds and flesh breeds, meat breeds. There was one, there was an aurochs, and then from that, they used to kill them for flesh and for dairy, both. But then they decided they wanted to start selectively breeding them, and let's selectively breed them for high milk production. So you can tell those animals. A lot of people who see cattle grazing on the side of the road think those are, dairy cow. Oh, they're happy cows. They're grazing. You're most likely seeing beef cattle because you have to graze these animals. They have to be grazed. They certainly supplement their diet with the corn and soy once they get to the feedlot, but they have to graze. They literally would explode if they didn't have any greens at all. So you're most likely seeing the beef cattle who are going to be killed at a year to year and a half. It's usually 6 months to a year and a half. But the dairy, and they're stockier, they're shorter, or they're beefier, right? That's what they're bred for. Then you see the dairy cows who are really tall and really bony, so their bodies are sustaining this constant pregnancy and constant taking of the milk. So literally all these animals are bred for the purposes for humans, so far away from their original wild ancestry. So in a sense, they're all. We've altered them all. For our purposes. That's the systemic problem right there, right? So people say, well, what do you want? You want to see these animals, die off? They would die. Yes. Yes, I do. We've created these monsters, not the individuals, obviously, right? But we're talking about this systemically. That's the problem, is that we created these monsters who can't even hold up their own weight. That's not natural. We like to talk about nature. That's not nature.
I just wanted to add that on our we have a real active Facebook page. We've got about 35,000 something users.
I have 40,000.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry. Can't compete with that yet.
You can. You are. We are.
But one woman came on and was real adamant about not using the word GMO animals because she's an animal sciences professional in Europe, and she claims that it is incorrect to claim that the animals have been genetically modified in the way that plants are genetically modified. It's kind of interesting because to me it became a matter of semantics more than substance. Because if we settled on the word manipulation, if we can claim that animals are genetically manipulated, to me that is comparable, at least, maybe not technically, that in the term of what modification means as opposed to manipulation. But to me, the substance is the same, and the intention, like they said, is definitely the same, to get animals to produce at a certain level.
It's the introduction of natural selection has been removed from the picture.
Right. Yeah.